channel! Welcome back to my channel, and today we have another interesting video. Well, in my opinion, interesting at least, because in the past, I think you might remember, if you've been with me for a pretty long time, you'll remember that I've had some videos where I discuss the poet's words, namely Joy Harjo and Neil Gaiman. I mean, writers' words, right? So not only poets, but so in the past I got a subscription, a temporary subscription from my manager, and for masterclass. And then do you remember that when I listened to those two master classes, Neil Gaiman and Joy Harjo, and then I decided to take out the ideas, the beautiful thoughts that I thought were really important from those, and I decided that I would discuss those with you. So now I'm bringing back that that idea of discussing the words of the poets and writers with you, and for today it's Billy Collins. And to be very honest with you, I didn't know about him before listening to his masterclass, and it's kind of, for me, it was something new, and I loved that I learned something that I didn't know about him, about his writings before. But starting from now, obviously, I'm going to read more of him. But what I loved about his masterclass is that it was really helpful to me, and I related to some of the thoughts and ideas that he shared in his masterclass, and I wanted to share those ideas with you to kind of also even teach you something, because it's not what I am saying, it's somebody who's more experienced than I am in writing, right? So, and at the same time, to kind of help you get a little more inspired by all of those thoughts and ideas, because he gives so many interesting things to try out. Let's start with a small definition that he gives of poetry, which I incredibly loved. I don't even know whether you can say that or not, but just I really love that, which he says: poetry provides us with a history of human heart. And I love that, because that is so true. No matter what you write, no matter what you put into those lines, it has some history of you, of your heart. If not your heart, but then for sure somebody else's heart, because it's not always that you're writing about yourself, right? So sometimes you're writing about somebody else's struggles, whatever you've seen on TV in some series. And I just loved it, because it makes this one line so accurate, but at the same time so romantic as well. Like, it's the history of the human heart, and I just loved it, and I wanted to share that with you as well, because I think that so many of you might love it too, just like I did. And then there's this other one that he says, so just to kind of clarify it for the people who haven't ever watched a masterclass on that app. So the thing is that he's not literally just sitting and saying, let me give you a definition of poetry. It's not like that. He keeps just talking about poetry. He keeps discussing what poetry is, how it is defined, what are the best practices, and also he gives some examples from famous people's works like Shakespeare's sonnets, and also he brings it back to his own examples as well, to his own poetry. And so here, in this line, he was talking about how people in the past, when, for example, children, or just ordinary people, it doesn't really have to have an age restriction. So when you are keeping a diary, you usually keep it because you have something to say. You want to share what is happening in your life. You want to also even remember all of those things in the future. So to come back and to read, to remember what you were going through. So what I loved about this is that he said that poetry is a diary without the lock, because you want people to read it. So, and I really loved it, because I felt like it was a very accurate and beautiful description of what poetry is. Usually you're writing, there are some things that you don't want to share with other people, and you're writing that in the diary because, and then you lock it with the heart lock or something else. You lock it because you don't want somebody else to read those ideas, somebody else to come into your world. But when you are writing poetry, you already know that there are so many people who are going to come into your world, and you're actually literally opening the door to them, and you're like, yeah, come into my world, read it, and you might find some things that you've gone through that relate to the things that I've been going through. And I just love this definition a lot. So after that, here, the things that I took from his masterclass and put in my notes is how he teaches you what kind of what the structure of the poem should look like. But what I loved about his masterclass is when he was talking, he wasn't really pressuring you with his ideas of what poetry is and his ideas of what structure of the poem should be. He was just like, in my opinion, this should be like this, and I feel like this should be like this. For example, he says that the first few lines of the poem should contain something that is easy to accept. It's like you're setting the scene, right? So you're saying, I'm sitting here on a bench, looking at the birds. I am seeing two people walking around or walking down the streets. I am reminded of this or that. You're kind of setting the whole situation. You're not immediately going into the whole plot, into the main idea of the poem. And then he says, when the reader commits to the poem, you close the door behind the reader and you have them inside. He says that so the reader has committed to that poem already. They want to read what's next. They want to know what happened next. And they are already with you, and you're in the same place, and you're closing the door behind yourself and behind the reader. And now you can talk to them about the main idea of the poem and what you're trying to say and what you're trying to convey. That was the word that I was looking for. And he brings an example which I really liked. It's he says that the parallel that he brings is when you go to check your eyes, and the first thing that you see is for example, they're like, yeah, look at what letter is this, right? So they're showing you a big letter E, let's say, and with time that E keeps getting smaller because you go level up, and then you come to the smallest part where it's really small, and you have to commit to really want to see what that letter is. But the first thing is the most obvious one that you see because it's the biggest one. And I love that he says that there's no chronology in poetry. You can go anywhere, you can be anywhere, and you can fly, you can do all sorts of things. And he brought the example that sometimes people are like, so in poetry you can do anything that you want, you can be anything that you want. And what I loved about his ideas is that some people are just taking poetry and they're like, and they're writing in those poems, they're like, I wish I could fly, I wish I could do this, I wish I could do that. And he's like, you actually can do that. You can do that in poetry, and why are you not doing that? It would be better for you to take that experience and already imagine if you're the one flying, what do you see? What are you encountering? Is there anybody? Is there something else that is flying? So he's like, instead of just dreaming and wishing for something, instead it would have been a better option to just take that experience and turn it into into a reality in your poems. And also he says that in a poem there are two subjects, the starting subject and the discovered subject. And I loved it because at first I was like, what? No, that's so not true, because usually I'm thinking that I'm gonna write I'm taking a theme, a topic, or just the main idea that I want to write about, and then I'm building the whole poem around that, and it's done. And I'm like, no, I don't agree with that. In my case, it doesn't work like that. But then when I thought about it for a longer time, I was like, oh yeah, that is so true, because I start with an idea of, for example, showing how heartbroken the speaker is, and then by the end of the poem, I usually reach to something else, which kind of brings you to the core problem that you wanted to discuss, which is, for example, the loss of trust in people, the loss of trust in love, right? And I feel like this is interesting because I feel like it's the same with when you want to talk about your feelings. Sometimes there are moments, I don't know if you've encountered that as well. I have. Sometimes I'm crying or I'm just sad, and I'm like, and then my mom's asking me, what's the reason behind your sadness? Like, why are you crying? What's happening? And I'm like, I am pissed because this happened and this happened and this and this and this. And then she usually lets me talk. She's not bombarding me with questions or anything, and then I keep talking, I keep expressing my feelings, like, this happened and this happened, and I am really pissed when people do this, when I was looked at like this, when I was talked to like this, blah blah blah. And then she leaves. She kind of lets me do the whole talking, and then after some time, I come to the real problem that made me so angry and made me so sad. So I think it's the same with poetry. You have to kind of even build the setting, the scene for yourself to be able to come to the core problem and to be able to understand what really happened to you, what is really making you so sad, so disappointed, and down in the dumps. And I don't know, just let me know if you've ever felt like that when you feel like you're angry because of one thing, and then after talking, after discussing it with yourself or with somebody else, you realize that you're angry because of this, not because of that. This is what triggered your anger and your sadness, but this is what actually made you that sad and that angry. And we also got some writer block tips. Actually, this wasn't technically considered writer block tips because I was the one who titled it that way. He said that this is what you need to get started to be able to start a poem. But I feel like these tips can also be considered writer block tips, and I love those. The first one is, he says, take Wordsworth's words, which is like, he said that there's this thing of wise passivity. It's when you open yourself up to the world, you're kind of calming yourself down, you're closing your eyes, you're trying to come up with some things, and you're open to all the ideas and the emotions that are coming towards you. But he's like, what he's saying is that it doesn't always work out. And he admitted that because sometimes people are like, yeah, it's really easy to open up to somebody, or open up your heart to new ideas, and just closing your eyes and calming yourself down. It never works with me because it never calms me down. Probably I'm not in that place yet where I could reach that, but still it never works with me. So huge applause to you if it works for you. So he said that sometimes that might not work out, and you can go to other different options, which is, for example, taking a poem that you like and writing an imitation of it, or just using the first line and then first line as a beginning and then continuing it. He said that it would also be an interesting option to take to write 5 versions of the first line of your poem. And he said that it would be really interesting to try out, to play around with. And then he's like, write 5 different options of the first line and then see which one leads to a second line and a third one, etc. The third one is at the end of the day, and I've heard this from somebody else before. I heard this from one of my poetry friends on Instagram, and so did like Billy. So did Billy. No, the same idea was said also by Billy as well. And he's like, at the end of the day or the next morning, for example, so you can do this in 2 ways. The first way would be to write everything that happened to you when you're lying in your bed. At the end of the day, write all of the things that happened to you. And he's like, you don't have to make it complicated, or you can do this the next day, so the next morning write everything that happened the previous day. And he's like, you don't have to make this super super complicated, the statements and everything. You can just say, I did this, I did that, and I did this and that and that and that and that. And he's like, you don't have to also keep the chronological order because it makes it so much more complicated. You can just write it in a simple language, and also all the things that are kind of coming to your mind. And after that, you might be using some of those ideas and pairing up with each other and coming up with something that you didn't know was there to begin with. And I love that. I've never tried that before, because to be very honest with you, these days I'm really kind of exhausted when I am lying in my bed and trying to sleep. Whenever I put my hat on my pillow, I'm gone. I pass out literally. So I also, this is not a justification, because if I wanted to do that, I would have been able to do that for sure. But still, I think I have to try it, and I haven't tried it yet. And let me know if you have. And what I loved about his masterclass is one idea which I related to a lot. Sometimes I've seen that so many people, so many poets are doing their masterclasses, and they're like, I write a poem, and then days after, I keep coming back to that poem. I keep working on that poem and kind of turning it into the perfection that it should be, and turning it into the piece of writing that I would want it to be. And he was one of the few people who said that he writes in one sitting, and because if you do something in between, it's already something else. It kind of, he says, like, for example, if you write a poem and then you go to the movies and then you come back, you're already a different person. You have different feelings at that moment, and it turns it into something different, because and even though that's beautiful and that's great, but that's not the initial way that it should have been. And I loved it, because usually I felt so sad that whenever I heard people talk, the writers and the poets, I usually heard them say that they always come back to their poems, which I almost never do, because I feel like it turns it into a whole different poem, and I don't like it. Whenever I am sitting down to write something, it means that at that moment I have those particular feelings. I keep those in my notes. It doesn't really necessarily it has to be posted on that same day, but usually whenever I was writing that poem, I was going through those emotions, whether it's because of my own personal experiences or somebody else's. It doesn't really matter, but I was going through that. And if I live that poem and then come back to it, I know that the emotions are going to be so much more different. And sometimes I am going back to my own poems and I'm like, oh wow, I felt like this, I've been going through that, what was happening in my life? And then it feels like you're letting go of those emotions, and then you're coming back to those, and you can't even relate to yourself, because, well, you actually can, but the thing is that you can't completely relate to the person that you were a few minutes ago when you were writing that, because at that moment you had completely different feelings, and now you are already calm, you're not going through that, you let go of those emotions, and you're actually dealing with those emotions, and you're getting probably even rid of those emotions if they are the negative ones. And yeah, so I want to end this whole video by citing somebody that Billy cited in this video, um, in his master class, and he said that it was said by somebody. He didn't actually mention, probably it might not even be somebody famous, or he didn't remember his name, but it's not important. This idea is a really beautiful one, and I totally, absolutely agree with it. The beauty of the poem can be measured by the degree of silence it creates when it's finished, when the last line is literally over. And I couldn't agree more, because it's just mind-blowing. I realize that if something is really powerful, and if something makes me think deeply, and if something is really meaningful, after the poem I'm like left in silence, like, wow, I'm speechless. I can't say anything to this and about this yet, because I need some time to analyze, to digest, and everything. So I totally agree, and I really hope that in the future, if not yet, people read my writings and have that moment of silence, because they need to process, they need to analyze, and they need to understand what they feel about it. And I totally agree with this idea. And please comment below what you think about all of those tips, ideas, learning points. What do you think about some of the ideas that I shared here with you by Billy Collins? And it would be so interesting for me to read and understand what you think about it. Do you agree? Do you even do you maybe even use some of those in your writings, or is there a method that I mentioned that doesn't really work for you but works with for other people? So I would love to hear from you guys, and thank you so much for being with me in this video. I'm going to do more of these, because I feel like it's a really beautiful thing to be able to discuss other people's tips and ideas and thoughts on poetry, and just it kind of opens up your mind to new possibilities, which I love. And yeah, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for supporting me. Please put a thumbs up, write a comment. I'd be so interested to hear from you, and wait for the next video. Mwah!